Earlier in October, I drew a vampire slaying kit. While often composed of real antique items, the kits themselves as a whole aren't really historical artifacts, and it's most likely that they're invented somewhere in the 1970s. The idea of having a vampire slaying kit was very appealing to me given my growing antique aesthetic sensibilities, but also given that the storage in my room is very limited. It's not really practical for me to have a full-size vampire kit, and that is the reason I decided to make a tiny one. Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm an amateur miniature artist. The thing that actually got me inspired to make a vampire kit is this little pewter gun charm that my sister made for me that's been sitting around in my jewelry box since high school, and I thought it's time to give it some friends. And just in case none of that was challenging enough for me, I also decided to make everything else in the box a charm as well, with the intention of making them all into earrings. To get the ball rolling, I began with a tiny Bible. I don't actually have any experience with bookmaking, so everything I know is actually from that Nerdforge video where they combine about 10 books into one giant book. But anyway, I cut up some cream-colored fibrous paper into little pages and grouped them into stacks. Then I clamped them together and applied some PVA glue to one edge. For extra stability, I also glued on a teeny strip of fabric. Once that was dry, I glued a bit of red embroidery floss to the inner edges to simulate the appearance of headbands. For the cover, I cut out a bit of faux leather vinyl, rounded the edges, and stuck that onto the naked book, using a bit of glue and one more clamping session to ensure maximum adhesion. Since I had extra pages, I decided to make 2 Bibles. The original plan was to thrift some small cross charms or earrings and glue that onto the cover, but I got impatient and decided to use some rhinestones instead. This is what the final Bible looks like, and honestly, the bedazzled cross looks pretty cool. Feeling confident in my newfound miniature skills, I dug up some leftover sandalwood and began making the box itself. I started with this hexagonal shape inspired by my jewelry box and cut out some strips for the walls. This ended up being too shallow for the main body, so this became the lid while I made another one with much deeper walls. While I waited for the glue to dry, I made a wooden stake using a thin dowel that I painted brown and then sharpened with an X-Acto knife. After applying and buffing out a layer of finishing wax to get a nice shine, I glued a loop of wire to one end and then wrapped it with some brown embroidery floss. Next up, I wanted to make the world's smallest rosary beads. I whittled out a tiny little cross, and I can't say whittle without thinking about that one post where someone carved Sonic the Hedgehog out of peanuts and then encased him in resin, but I wasn't very happy with how plain it was and once again bedazzled it with some rhinestones. Using some seed beads and a little coin charm that I harvested from this broken earring, I mocked up the rest of the rosary beads and then strung everything together. Next, to make a jar of salt, I used one of these small bottles that I think are meant for essential oils or something. I removed the applicator, filled the jar with salt, and then set about making an old-timey label with some brown craft sticker paper I got as a sample last year. Using the thinnest pen I had, I drew out an elaborate label, cut it out, and applied it to the bottle. With the bottle looking a little too shiny and new, I scuffed up the lid with sandpaper, dabbed on some silver paint, and then added a small amount of brown paint to simulate rust. Off-screen, I also glued together a variety of silver and faceted beads to create little bottles of potion. One is holy water and the other one is, I am not too sure, garlic essential oil, I guess? To make a tiny hand mirror, I'm using another charm I salvaged from that broken earring. For the reflective surface, I cut up a flake of silvery sequin. Although I have very shiny sequins, I first wanted to try this more beat-up looking one, mostly because I thought having a tarnished mirror might look cooler. To encase the back, I used a similar but smaller charm from the same earring. I carefully glued all of that together and then applied a ruby rhinestone on the back for good measure. Since I had some leftover glue that I didn't want to waste, I also got to bedazzling this cross pendant. I have no idea where it came from, and I also didn't end up using it, but let me just show you how I did it anyway. I glued a red rhinestone to the center of it, wrapped it with this ball joint chain, and later, when I accidentally squeezed out too much glue yet again, I filled up the rest of the cross with more rhinestones. But unfortunately, I discovered. So it appears that the glue did something to the silvery backside of the rhinestones, and now they all look
glittery.
And it also turned the mirror sequin into a strange goopy texture, as well as destroying any reflective property it previously had. Luckily, earrings come in pairs, and I simply took the same charms from the other earring and made the mirror again. To mitigate the E6000 problem, I used my trusty Asian craft glue, which isn't as strong, doesn't dry as fast, but at least it wouldn't consume my sequin. This time I decided to use the shinier sequin because the tarnished one I used before just wasn't shiny enough to look like a mirror. To make the handle, I harvested some pearly seed beads from this bracelet, strung them on a wire, and glued it to the back of the mirror along with another red rhinestone. Don't ask me why a vampire slayer would need a fancy pearl-handled mirror. There are just some things in the world we will never have the answers to. And that's okay. Next, I wanted to make a dagger. My sister used to be into making tiny things, so she has a bag of random trinkets that I guess belongs to me now. For the blade, I used a brad, and for the handle, I found this loopy metal thing and a small bit of dowel conveniently already cut in half. I glued the dowel on first, accidentally making a butter knife, and glued the metal thing on to complete the base structure. I carefully sanded the handle down so it's less bulky, and then just like the wooden stake, I attached a loop of wire to the end and belatedly gave the handle a brown wash. Later, I also gave it a polish with finishing wax and added 2 little rhinestones. Dagger and stake, the Stabby brothers. I had an unspoken rule that I wasn't going to buy anything new for this project, but I came across this grisly ornate crucifix for 50 cents and I had to buy it. I didn't end up using it because it was a little too big, but I liked having the option.
For the top, I'm just planning to lay a single panel of velvet and then hooking these objects in with little leather straps. For the bottom, however, I want to have those inset padded fancy cushions.
To achieve that, I used foam to create this section layout and covered it with velvet fabric. Then I placed everything back in the box for a preview. This was very exciting to look at because it was so close to being done. I just needed to line the rest of the box with velvet, but before I can do that, I had to stain the wood.
So here's the deal. I want to paint this wood a nice dark mahogany-ish color. I don't have any dark wood stain, but my sister does, but she won't be able to give it to me until the 25th, which is about 2 weeks from now, and I don't really want to wait that long, so I'm going to try using acrylic paint. I did do some tests, and I think it can work, so keep your fingers crossed for me.
Just to make sure I wouldn't ruin my box, I tested the brown acrylic wash on a scrap piece of wood and waxed it for good measure. As you can see, the darker colors did not respond well to the wax, so I'm glad I did this test.
Just in case anything goes wrong, just remember, this is how pretty it looked before.
I applied 2 thin washes to the box to get the color I wanted. This was the final paint job, and I even pre-painted the weathering where the hinges would go. While waiting for the box to dry, I cut out some faux leather straps and glued them onto the top velvet piece so the charms can stay in place. For the bottles, I fashioned a little hook out of wire. If you're wondering why this potion bottle looks a little different from the one before, that's because it is. After the box was dry, I lightly sanded it down and applied a few layers of wax and polished it to get this nice sheen. I lined the sides of the box with ribbons of velvet, glued the bigger velvet pieces in, and for extra fanciness, also applied little rhinestones to the leather straps. As one of the final steps, I added a small hinge to the box. This was the only small hinge that existed in my house, and it previously looked like this before I cut it down. It's recommended you let E6000 dry for 24 hours, so I left the box alone, all taped up and secure. Remember this guy? This is him now. Feel old yet? Just kidding, I just dry brushed some brown paint onto it to make it look old and decrepit. I also gave the same treatment to the hinges. Now this looks like something that could give me moderate to severe tetanus, which as far as I'm concerned is historically accurate. I gave the hinge a little test, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the last step of the process. Prepare thy buttocks because it is time for the final reveal.
Look at this, okay? My tripod is not strong enough to hold the camera on its own, so I have to step on the strap to keep it from falling over. Ignore this is not important.
And now it's time for some wrap-up thoughts. This basically came out exactly how I envisioned it, so I'm very proud of that. The box itself is a little crooked, but you can't really tell. The only real problem is, you might have seen this in the montage, but I had to remove this big orbular potion bottle in order to get the box to close. See, it won't close all the way with the orb. But I think I'm going to display it open like this anyway, so it's not really a problem. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and happy Halloween! And maybe in the future I'll make a full-size vampire box. I'm just kidding, I can't do that. Unless...